500 companies, probably a couple thousand, maybe more. And we have talked many times about the four fund strategy. Well, this is the four fund strategy, except the four fund strategy we know is 25% each in these four different equity asset classes. And we'll see that return in just a few minutes. Now, the addition of REITs. What we were told, what I heard when I went through the initiation, the instruction from dimensional funds, from the academic community, what they told us was that REITs would probably make about the same return, at least they had, as the S&P 500. And that what you were really getting by adding REITs is an equity asset class that has a return that is similar to the S&P 500 historically, but it is not correlated. It doesn't move up and down like the S&P 500. Now, sometimes it does, of course, but there are lots of times when the REITs are doing the opposite, if you will, from the S&P 500. And so when you put it in the portfolio, it isn't there. They said, don't expect to make more money, but it should reduce the volatility of the portfolio. Well, and in fact, it does. The standard deviation falls to 16.8. And this is the first year since 1995 that I have made this presentation that the number at the end of the period of time was lower than the four fund portfolio. You made about $220 some thousand less by adding the REITs. But it did bring down the volatility. And then, in one fell swoop, we take these four international equity asset classes down here, and we put them together as 140% position. So 10% each, international large cap blend, international large cap value, international small cap blend, and international small cap value. And now you have 9 different equity asset classes, and the compound rate of return is now 11.8%. What in essence just happened is that each one of those international equity asset classes, each one of them added approximately 0.75% so that with the addition of those four, you go from 11.5 to 11.8. So you're up almost 1% from the original 10.9%. And you are now up to almost $17 million from the $29.9 million you started with the S&P 500 for a total of $46.8 million. But there's more, because we're going to add the emerging markets. And of course, emerging markets is one that is really volatile. Spends a lot of time at the top, a lot of time at the bottom when you look at the returns over decades. But over the whole period of time, because it is so volatile and because it does its own thing, and so in the rebalancing process, it can be really helpful. It takes the return to 12.1%. It takes the dollar return to $53.4 million. And yes, it also takes the standard deviation up about 1%, which is a very small increase. So when I saw this, and I realized that every time I added a baby step, I added an asset class, I was adding more companies, I was adding equity asset classes that as a group had paid a good premium. Remember, when they talk about premiums in the equity market, the first place they compare to is the fixed income. And all of these equity asset classes are historically way above that of bonds. So my hope was that this would give people who would take the risk of these other asset classes a sense that because they're only a small piece of the whole, that it is a risk worth taking. What, of course, I know, and you know, if you've tried to do it, it's a lot of work to manage a portfolio of 10 different equity asset classes, particularly if you add fixed income asset classes as well. But there is one other good lesson on this page, and that is the table that's the box here in the middle. It's the same strategy. You start with the S&P 500 and you add in 10% increments. The difference is this. In the table at the top, it was rebalanced annually. In the table in the middle, it is rebalanced monthly. Well, when you rebalance monthly, it means that the better returns of the more risky equity asset classes are going to gravitate very quickly to the lower producing asset classes. So you're going to spend less time accumulating wealth because you're taking the best producing equity asset classes, you're taking their excess profit and giving it to those that are producing less. Now, I don't know if this is a life-changing difference to you, but I can tell you at the end of that 55-year period that the one ended up with the annual rebalancing strategy ended up with 53,439,676 versus 47,923,359 for the monthly rebalancing. So it is our belief that the more often you rebalance, not only is it a lot more work, but it is also going to lead, in most cases, to a lower return. But it probably won't shock you to find out that it also led to a lower standard deviation, 17.4 for portfolio 7 versus 18.2 for the annual rebalancing in the same portfolio. So we have spent historically most of our time talking about this 50-50 combination. And in fact, it's probably, the reality is that most people don't have 50-50. I happen to have 50-50 because the whole idea was not to play favorites with what were perceived as equity asset classes that would perform well over the long term. Well, what we know recently is the U.S., and there's a whole bunch of reasons, whether it's the strong dollar or our advantages in technology, whatever they might be, they have served U.S. shareholders well. Now, I expect you've got what we're trying to show here with this table. The thing that's important to me, and I think has made a huge difference in what we can do for you, is that it was this portfolio that from 2012, when I retired, until Chris Pedersen joined our foundation, and Daryl had joined our foundation by, I think, 2014, and Chris in 2016. And they said, along with others, that 10 different equity asset classes was too much. Now, of course, I was really only trying to show the implications of using all of these. I didn't mean to suggest you had to use all of these, but what we hadn't done is the research to find out how could you build different combinations that would then require fewer of these asset classes, but still give us the same exposure to large and small and value and growth. And then, of course, US and international. And Chris took on the project. And I think what he came up with is absolutely wonderful because, as you will see as I go to the next table, it is not a table about the 10 equity asset classes. It is a whole bunch of different ways that you can put these asset classes to work. So as we look over here at the far left, we see the S&P 500. That we call portfolio one. It isn't that we recommend it as a portfolio, but we do know that that is what a lot of people have decided, either the S&P 500 or the total market index. That's their equity exposure. But next to it, you can see the ultimate buy and hold worldwide. It's just what I've been talking about for a half an hour, and that is the combination of all of those different equity asset classes. That shows the same thing as we saw before, that the S&P 500 grew to almost 30 million on the $100,000 investment in 1970, and in the ultimate buy and hold over 53 million. And here's where the great work of Chris and Daryl and all the work they did to simplify and still give us a shot at getting a higher rate of return using exclusively these equity asset classes that the academics had blessed. But it didn't mean we had to use them all. And so when you look, for example, at the worldwide four-fund strategy, and if you went down to the bottom of that page and you looked at what the worldwide four-fund strategy is, it's 25% S&P 500, 25% small cap value, US, 25% international large cap value, and 25% international small blend. So basically, with the exception of emerging markets and the REIT, it was the same exposure percentage-wise to large and small and value and growth. It was basically the same thing. And what we find out is the return over that 55 years in this table was almost exactly the same as the ultimate buy and hold. And when you look then at the next column, the US four-fund strategy, you'll notice it too is about the same. And what does it have? It has 25% S&P 500, 25% large cap US value, 25% small cap blend, 25% small cap value. It's the same combination of exposure to equity, but the total value, 56,500,000. Almost the same as the worldwide four-fund. Now, it does get different if you look at the worldwide all value. That's some US and international. The compound rate of return goes up more, but remember, historically, value has done better than blend. So if you expose all of your money to value all of the time, you would have had a considerably higher total return in terms of dollars, about 76 million, and a compound rate of return of 12.8. But boy, that doesn't mean that strategy is for you. And the reason it might not be for you is that that strategy, all value, is getting rid of the diversification of growth in the portfolio. And it means there are times, long periods of time, that you're going to be kind of out of sync with the market and scratching your head asking, have I made a big mistake? And then